In this video, I'm going to tell you about the new add-on for Kill Team, Arena, and whether it's the new Shadespire or something else. So as I've said many times, I'm not particularly a competitive player, but I do enjoy the fact that there are competitive players out there, that there are competitive tournaments, big events, things like that. The type of games that I like to play with friends and people maybe at the shop don't generally bring 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 people together, gamers, hobbyists, tabletop, whatever, into big, events like the Las Vegas Open, which I'm going to next week, or Adepticon, or Nova Open in DC later on in the year, or any of these other type of things that crop up. Those generally don't crop up and get as big as they do without some sort of major tournaments. Now, that being said, I still don't play in those tournaments, but a lot of people do. And I think that there was some talk early on after Kill Team was first released back in July, I think it was, that it was maybe not a great competitive game because, well, frankly, for some of the same reasons that 40K is not a great competitive game. There's a lot of gray area. The rules, the tournament organizers very frequently have to have very specific rules that are different than the ones in the books to make it a more competitive and fair and balanced type of game. But you've still got a lot of models on the board, and the board is designed in a way that there's no hexes or squares, and there's a lot of three-dimensionality, and, well, I think this guy can see that entire guy. Well, no, I think you can't see his foot, so therefore he's obscured, and all that kind of stuff, which is enjoyable and fun, frankly, for me, in a normal tabletop fun game with a friend or somebody at the local shop. But when you're playing a tournament and you're trying to get, through games, multiple games in a certain day, and hopefully score well, it can become kind of a problem. One of the ways the Games Workshop went into trying to get into the tight and balanced rule set competitive field was with Warhammer Underworlds. I always want to say Ultima Underworlds, but that's a Warhammer Underworlds, which was originally first Shadespire, and now you have Night Vault. Those games are specifically designed to be competitive, and you can tell because they're played on a hex board, so there's never any judging about whether, well, I think you're about 3 millimeters off. Well, no, I think that you just nudged the board. You're either in a hex or you're not. Okay, so there's that. You've got these decks of cards which kind of bring a lot of the Magic players and those types of competitive folks to the yard, and so that's kind of a fun thing. But yet there's still revised lists, or restricted lists and reserve lists and things like that you can't use these during tournaments and you can't use these during whatever and that kind of stuff. So you've got that ability and that kind of competitive level, and you can easily also play by just playing with the unpainted, colored plastic models that come either in the starter boxes for Shadespire or in any of the add-on boxes. And I still believe to this day that Shadespire, to some degree, is a direct kind of move against something like Star Wars X-Wing, which turned into a very competitive game. You saw a big competitive circuit of play, of championships all over the place. And I think that Games Workshop was looking at what they were doing and saying, we want to be able to do that and make it easier for the tournament organizers to not have to write their own rules and go through all their own stuff and do all of this. We want to make a game that is kind of self-contained and streamlined and definite, but still fun and can be competitive. And I think that the original Kill Team that came out last summer wasn't necessarily fitting that particular flavor. And if you were into more 40K and less into, say, Age of Sigmar, which is where you get to play Shadespire and whatnot, you were sort of stuck. So along comes a new add-on, Arena, which this is, make no bones about it, this is not a required add-on. There's no such thing as a required add-on, at least in this system so far. You had Commanders, you could use it or you could not. You got Rogue Trader, you could use it or you could not. And the same with this. Again, you can either decide to use this or not. But this is, no bones about it, designed for competitive play to the point where it even has an entire section in the rules booklet about how to run tournaments, either at your local shop or something bigger or whatever, which I've never seen before, really, for the most part, in any Games Workshop games. So why such a big box? Well, I'll tell you why. Partially it's because it comes with terrain. Okay, so this is 2 sprues, heavy duty, kind of a silvery gray plastic. Most of these models I recognize, but I've never seen them in this sprue configuration before. And you have doors and barrels, and you have crates, some kind of pipe things, and then you also have some boards as well. And there are 2 boards in here, and each is double-sided. So there are 4 possible, I haven't taken them out of the shrink yet, but there are 4 possible boards that you can play with. Now, when I first saw these boards, they had squares on them, and I thought to myself, okay, they've decided to make it a game of rather than I measure, instead now I go 1 square, 2 squares, 3 square, which is not true. That was what I first thought when I saw the images, and I thought, okay, that's why it's kind of heading towards maybe the Shadespire thing, because Shadespire uses hexes. And I was kind of bummed about the concept of taking Kill Team and trying to put it into this more of a, I'm just moving my playing pieces along the squares like I'm playing Candyland. But they didn't do that. If anything, it's because I think in the book, when they show you how to set up the missions, they show you very specifically where to put all of these pieces of terrain. And you don't play by the rules in this book with other pieces of terrain. You only play with this stuff. And so I think that, honestly, the squares on the board there make it very simple for you to go, okay, I have to put these barrels 1, 2, 3, 4 squares over right there on that line. And it makes it a lot easier to make sure that you can set up the board the way they say in the book. Because the thing about the way these boards are designed is they are absolute perfect mirrors of each side. There's never a game where you set it up and go, well, if I pick this side of the board, I've got the taller building, so that kind of gives me a little bit of higher ground for my sniper or whatever along those lines. This is designed to be set up so that my side of the board is identical to your side of the board. And every one of the 4 different kind of kill zones that come in these big, thick boards are not identical to each other, but each side of them is identical to the other side. And again, there's special rules in here that explain exactly where you put all this terrain. And this is the way that these missions are done. There's kind of no leeway. I mean, certainly if you and your friends want to do it and start, changing things up, that's fine. But I know that if this rule set starts getting picked up by the big tournaments and they start playing Arena at a lot of the big tournaments, you will be playing with exactly these boards, with exactly this terrain, in exactly the way that this book says. So the book starts off by telling you about ultra-close confines. One of the things you need to know about the Arena boards, there's really no 3-dimensionality. That 3-dimensionality, though, something that I love for normal Kill Team play, doesn't really lend itself super well to competitive play. Having everything flat and you're basically walking through hallways, almost a little bit like Space Hulk, makes the game a little bit easier to figure out when you have cover, when you don't have cover, when you've got line of sight, all that kind of stuff. Honestly, going through these rules, it reminds me a little bit of the old Star Wars miniatures game that Wizards of the Coast used to make, where they would have the pre-painted Star Wars guys. This is back around, it was like post the prequels, Clone Wars and stuff like that. And they made these little kind of rubbery sort of HeroClix type people, but they were all Star Wars pre-paints. And it was a tabletop skirmish board, which you played on just a mat. There was no actual, 3-dimensional terrain or anything like that. And this has got some 3-dimensional terrain, but it's really honestly just there for a bit of a visual flair. This could all be played, frankly, on just a board with no terrain at all. The terrain could be built into the board and it would work the same way. The only benefit to having these things is that if you print it onto the board, you can't ever move the terrain. And in this, you can kind of move the terrain around depending on which mission you're playing. So again, this is an add-on to Kill Team. So you need the normal Kill Team book, but then you have these extra special things talking about walls and visibility and being obscured. And it kind of tweaks and changes the normal Kill Team stuff and tells you all about that. Then it's got an entire section explaining the 4 different kill zones. You've got Generatorium, I guess it's where the generators are. Catacombs, that's easier to say. The Garrison Vault, and I skipped one. Stockpile. So the 4 boards, each 2 boards, double-sided, and then the terrain that you're given, that's how you make those 4 kill zones. And that's pretty much the only way you do it. They tell you exactly how to set up the terrain, like how to put it together. And when they say this, that means 3 barrels with 1 on top, or it means 2 crates with a thing. And so there's never any like, yeah, but his side has got the better terrain than mine, because it's always, again, like I said, in every one of these missions, it's mirrored. And then there's all the different missions, and they're called competitive play missions. So that kind of differentiates them from narrative missions, from matched missions, stuff like that. And they give you all the information that you need on how to set up each board and all the different things for deployment and scouting phase and all the other stuff. And it's designed to be played so that each side has an absolutely kind of equal thing. And again, it's the type of game where like a lot of people in Kill Team don't play with the... Like, I have a tendency just to build a 100-point army. But what you're supposed to do is have a roster of models and then pick your 100 points after you've figured out which mission you're going to play. They back that up definitely in Arena. Like, that's a big point of it. And I think that you're going to see a lot of that in the competitive play at events and tournaments and things like that, is that you're going to be bringing a bunch of models, and depending on what you know of your opponent and what you know of the mission, you're going to then be able to pick your stuff, because you have to have these cards and the data cards and all that jazz set up. And they give you a bunch of also all kinds of cards and all kinds of extra stuff inside this box. Even the mission cards, it looks like, where they have these big deck of missions on these cards instead of having to have them in the book. And it kind of helps for maybe shuffling together and deciding which mission is going to happen at which time. Then they have something called Ultima Missions, which is basically team games, where 2 of us versus 2 of you. And what you have to do is have 2 sets of Arena, because you're putting the boards together, and they have to be perfectly mirrored. And again, all of it's explained in the different Ultima Missions, and it shows you all the different ways that they have to go together and where the terrain goes and where the deployment is and all that stuff. And so it's kind of cool that they're also not just giving you the 1-on-1, but the 2-on-2, because there's a lot of... I mean, Adepticon, one of the biggest tournaments, is the 40K team tournament, and it's also, I think, one of the most fun to watch. So being able to kind of take that into consideration over at Games Workshop and put that into the rules booklet, I think is a pretty good sign. And then lastly, they've got an entire section on Kill Team tournaments and how to run them. You've got tournament structure, scoring, ranking, arena objectives, tokens, data cards, tournament rules, miniatures, all the stuff that you would have to kind of think about ahead of time before you decide to sit down and run a tournament. And again, this is, at least in my mind, they've talked about, organized play in the past in other older, like, main rule books and stuff like that. But to see this specific game go so kind of so skewed towards competitive play, it's very interesting, because again, this isn't going to be for everybody. This is going to be for the people that are interested in that kind of competitive play. It's not even necessarily going to be a situation people are like, well, I'm just going to buy it for the terrain, because as I've said, this is all terrain you can get in other places. They've just never had it all in one sprue like this before. I recognize these barrels, I recognize these ammo crates, even the pipes and the doors. This is all stuff they've had out for a while. It's just now you've got it all together, and you could literally have a tournament just with this box, as long as it was just a constant 1-on-1 tournament. Maybe you switched people through as you were playing, but that's up to you. A store could get multiples of these, get them all painted up, put them out, and have a good-sized, Kill Team Arena tournament for not a lot of money. So earlier in the video, I said, is this the new Shadespire? I wouldn't say so. I really think that it's moving in a direction that Shadespire originally moved in, but it's doing it in a different way. Shadespire was designed to be a competitive game, and like I said, I think it was designed to go head-to-head against Star Wars X-Wing and the tournament scene that was happening around that. And we're seeing big, Warhammer Underworld tournaments at the big conventions. So that, mission accomplished there. With Kill Team Arena, this is them trying to take the current Kill Team rules to make them even a little bit more stripped down and specific so that they will work best in tournament play. The thing that always goofs up tournament play is when the rules in normal play are left to be a little loosey-goosey, for lack of a better term. When the rules are kind of like, well, you just measure and you shoot and you whatever, use your best judgment. In a lot of games, you'll see that whole thing. Well, if you can't decide, roll off. You can't do that in a tournament. So tournament rules have to be much more strict and specific. And that's what they're doing with this Kill Team Arena. And again, I'm not a competitive player, but it's really interesting to see them taking this tack and knowing that though, Shadespire, Night Vault, whatever, is doing well for them over on the fantasy side, they needed something, I think, that's going to do just as well, but in a different way over on the 40K side.